Hello and welcome to my show. Today I have with me a very special guest. His name is Zaki Mahomed. He is a serial entrepreneur, has founded several companies and is running one of them right now called UltraRev. He is going to talk to us about his entrepreneurial journey and give us some tips on AI. Welcome, Zaki.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Zaki, today there's so much to talk to you about, but I want to focus on your entrepreneurial journey and how you have been able to manage so many different companies and wear so many different hats at the same time. And also talk to us how you discipline yourself in doing that. But before we get to that, can you give the audience a little bit about your background?
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to do it. I'm Zaki. I am a serial entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur based out of Austin, Texas. I am from Pakistan originally. So I was born in Karachi and ended up in school in Singapore. I started a company while in school. I was in engineering school in Singapore called TimeSvr. TimeSvr was one of the original virtual assistant businesses. So we were basically matching busy professionals, young professionals, to an assistant that was online in the Philippines, in Pakistan, and other places where we had assistants. And they could get tasks done that could be handled remotely, like arrange laundry pickup, find a gift for my partner for their birthday, but also like schedule meetings and take notes and annotate. You could joke it was the original AI. The idea came to me because I was visiting New York, and all my friends, they'd just be so busy and they wouldn't even have time to hang out. And so I remember a conversation I was having with a couple of friends. I was like, why don't you just get an assistant? And they're like, that's so expensive. This is America. And I was like, wait, this could be outsourced. And so that's how TimeSvr came to be. We built some software that allowed you to like interact with assistants. And then the magic sauce was sort of that you could swap out the assistant underneath because the software would take care of like personalization and like remember things about you basically. And so, you could train up an assistant faster and swap them out a little bit more easily and carry knowledge forward between individuals. Okay, so we had a team in Pakistan because that's where I was from, right? And my co-founder was from there too. And so we actually hired these folks. They weren't even contractors, and we trained them up. Like oftentimes they came from like backgrounds like call centers, where they were really good at problem solving and they spoke the language and they could interact with people overseas, and they were like really tired of call center jobs. And so my pitch to them would be like, you solve problems all day and people scream at you for it. Why don't you come here and solve problems all day, and then they'll thank you for it, right? And that was a good pitch. And so we bootstrapped that company, and then eventually I ended up selling the company to one of my co-founders because in the same time was dabbling in Facebook games. And so Facebook games were becoming a really big thing. You had games like Farmville and other games, resource management games, Candy Crush type games that were getting very popular. And I was like, well, that I see the opportunity, but I really freaking hate those games. And turns out I wanted to build sports games. And so and this coincided with my graduation in 2008 from NUS. So I was a civil engineer technically, never wanted to practice, barely made it out of school. And this was 2008, so the financial crisis had hit too. So there were no jobs anyways. So I was like, you know what? Let's just build sports games on Facebook.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Coming from a South Asian or Asian family, I don't know how it is in Pakistan, but at least in India, most parents, most educated families expect their children to be very well educated and then get a job. That's just the lifestyle. How is that like talking to your parents and just telling them that I'm not getting a job and I am just going to start a gaming company?
Actually, I was very lucky because I come from a family that's like a business family. Like my dad had a business. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who comes from India. He's a very successful business in Singapore. I remember him saying, the kind of family I'm from, like I would have more respect in my family if I just owned a little pawn shop somewhere in India, like a little corner store somewhere in India, than have a job, right? No
Oh
matter
my
what the job
God.
is.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
wasn't I think a lot of people folks from subcontinent who come from like business backgrounds can relate to that. Like, you could be the CEO of Microsoft, but then you'd have a little bit less respect than if you owned a much smaller company. Maybe not, that's an extreme example, but like, I think that's true. That's definitely the case. So that was one piece of it. And then like, I've always been entrepreneurial. I started companies in high school with friends and we made websites and sold SAT tutoring. And so I think like, in some ways, my parents were just happy he's not starving in Singapore. So
What is
that was a piece of it.
What is an entrepreneur? How would you define entrepreneurship?
I think
We've used
entrepreneur.
this term so much in the last 5 minutes. I want to understand what you define this term as.
I actually don't like that term. I remember learning to spell it because I used to be an Entrepreneur magazine, and I would always misspell the word entrepreneur, back when I would read it when I was really really young. I think it's just a fancy French word for someone who starts a business that creates value in the world. We were talking about kids right before this call, or before this recording started. And I feel like entrepreneurship is truly the closest men can get to like giving birth to something, right? Because you're creating something from nothing. And I'm not saying it's equivalent at all, of course, but I find that act really interesting, like creating value in the world, thinking of something new and then making it a reality and then making people pay for that reality, right? So I think entrepreneurship is just this itch that we need to scratch, where something about our psychology just makes us want to build better and newer things that are slowly taking us somewhere.
Yeah.
That's entrepreneurship, the act of like making human beings get 1% or 0.1% closer to our ultimate state by fulfilling a need that we have today and
Yeah.
doing it at scale repeatedly.
So, Zaki, started several companies at a very young age. You've kind of been through the grind, learned from your experiences. I've been the kind of person who's always been very skeptical and scared of having an unstable life. And it's only now that I'm finally getting out of that mindset. So, if someone was worried about starting a company, mostly because of the unstable lifestyle, like what is that motivating factor that that person needs to actually take the risk and go for it?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on the person. Personally, I think if you're going to do this like I do this, like be an entrepreneur your entire career, right? You have to like de-risk your life in order to be able to do it, right? If you have a very large monthly nut that you got to make, right? For example, then it's very hard to like take risks. If you've got a lot of kids in school, then it's hard to take risks, right? And not just the monetary reasons, but also like other reasons, right? Like the missing out on time spent with family and things like that. So there are definitely situations where you want to not start a company at all, right? But I think that's actually not the case for most people when they're hesitating, right? Most people are just overthinking. And I think we're like humans are really good at overthinking things and
Yeah.
like talking ourselves out of things. I hate having regrets. And if I don't scratch that itch, if I have a really compelling idea that's really grabbed me, and then if it's still grabbing me a few weeks later, then I know at this point in my life, I know I have to scratch that itch or it's going to drive me nuts. And now I could do more research into it, but I also know at that point I'm gonna talk myself out of the idea if I keep thinking about it. So there comes a time where I just have to like pull the plug and start it, and that's a very physical act. I'm gonna make a conscious decision. I'm gonna take 3 or 4 weeks. I'm gonna test this idea out. And I'm not saying go quit your job on that day. I always find it funny when people go like, "Oh, I raised money, congratulations!" And if you've done it long enough, like you're like, it's like congratulating someone to get I'm getting a mortgage, right? But you'll find yourself getting pulled into, hey, maybe I could start in this way, or maybe I can take like a part-time thing over here and investigate the idea. You'll pull the plug on it, you'll start it to investigate, and then you can scale out from there, right? Like uh, things will shape up and you won't be that lean one day and you might go full time. It naturally, organically progresses. I've seen that's worked for me. I have friends though who will pull the band-aid and go like, I'm gonna go raise a whole bunch of money on day one, get a big office and just burn the boats and never go back. And now that's the company I gotta pivot into to success in that space. That works too, right? So I feel like it really depends on the kind of person you are. Like for me, I want to make little bets and then learn iteratively, like the scientific method, and then go and one day I find myself doing this thing full time, and that's great. You need to know what works for you, and then just go freaking do it. That's the commonality between all those things, right? Like pull the band-aid and just get into the arena. And once you're in the arena, things happen to you. You react to things. Everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face, right? So
Yeah.
try to get punched in the face fast, and don't let yourself talk yourself out of it.
I think a lot of people also coming from a place of fear and failure. It's a
Yeah.
combination of these two. And especially for someone who's never taken a risk, the thought of failing because they drive their identity from the little success they've already
Mm.
got, right? And imagine trying something out and then failing at that. I mean, it's hard. So how does one deal with that? Or do you think failure is a very important part in entrepreneurship? Like you got to fail a couple of times and only then you're going to succeed and do well.
Gosh, I think failure is really important. I like failure. I don't mind failure. I feel like it's fun. I think the most interesting people, the people I know who are way more successful than me, just have a very strange relationship with failure. They embrace it and they love it. A really good friend of mine who has pivoted through 40, 50 ideas and has had incredible success with his startups and wrote a blog post about the 30 ideas that they tried out before they tried out the thing that actually worked for them. And I just think about his journey, and I don't think he can process failure in the way most people will consider failure, because the end result is, oh, you make a ton of money, and then no one considers you a failure. But that act of sausage making, where you're pivoting through ideas and like churning and burning through, I hired a whole bunch of doctors for this idea. Turns out I shouldn't be hiring doctors. Maybe I just need PAs and like registered nurses instead, and I can save some money. Let's just fire my entire doctor team and do something else with it entirely. It might seem very churn and burn in that moment, and it is, but you have to destroy to create. And so if you don't do that, if you're afraid of embracing failure, when they have that mentality, they probably shouldn't start a company anyways, because once they do start a company, they aren't, if they're really afraid of failure, then they'll never make the hard decisions that will be required, I promise you, on that journey to pivot, to try new things, to stop things that aren't working, to cut investments before they become too much of a loss. And so you have to cut your losses, and that's what failure is in many ways. And you have to learn something from it so you can do better next time. And if you're afraid of doing that because of any reason, like if you're afraid of what people will say behind your back, or you might think your ideas weren't good, you might take it personally, right? If any of that stops you from making hard decisions, your company will fail, and you're better off not starting it first place. Like you wouldn't have started this podcast if you thought through the whole, like, so many people are doing podcasts, and there's so many ways to talk yourself out of it, but here you are, right? And so I think if you can do that, then you've earned the ticket to do the thing that you need to do, right? But if you don't ever get yourself there, it's probably for the best anyways, because you will fail in that process, because you won't make the hard choices that will be required, that will, I promise you, make you look like a failure and make you look like an idiot. I think you have to take yourself a little bit less seriously also. I think a lot of founders, where I see them screwing up, is they take themselves really seriously. And if you talk to a founder who's the stereotypical Silicon Valley founder, so tightly, or she's so tightly buttoned up, because this is my one shot at this in my life, right? And I think it's just adding undue pressure on themselves. I personally don't like hanging out with some of those personalities. I think you have to take yourself less seriously, leave you're a complete idiot, and then you won't be so afraid of like mistakes, and you'll only learn, and you'll get better. And so it puts you in a good place, I think, right? There's something about that, like Zen mind, beginner's mind kind of thing.
I love that advice. So, Zaki, you started lots of companies very young. I want to hear a little bit about the gaming company. What's your secret sauce? Apart from you having, this amazing confidence of just going out there and getting what you want, what other thing works for you when it's starting a company and actually making it successful?
Great. Let's start with the gaming company. So long story short, I ended up building a Facebook gaming company in Singapore. We didn't bootstrap that. We actually raised a little bit of money. Our main investor was the government of Singapore, and then the rest were all angel investors. So we had guys like the former director of the MIT Media Labs. We had professors from NUS. We had the guys who started India's largest private TV, or first and largest private TV channels as investors, entertainment, Bollywood people from India as investors. So I had a whole eclectic group of serial entrepreneurs from Canada who ended up working for at Influitive. Mark Organ was an investor and a board member. So ended up raising money for game ventures, ended up somehow having this collection of games over the course of 2 or 3 years. We built a poker game that became pretty popular. We sold that to Ubisoft, which is this big French gaming company. And then we had a set of games in Turkey, which we bought from a friend's company. They were like board and tile and card games. So our rule at Game Ventures was don't make up any rules. No fantasy games, no games where you got to make up a world. It has to be a repeatable thing that people have been playing for generations. But our big marquee achievement was a cricket game called Howzat Cricket, which was the most popular cricket game in that people still talk about it. It was a real labor of love, because literally that was the reason why I started the company, to build that cricket game. That was my baby. Okay. Correct. We had, I think at our peak, 6 or 7 million players around the world. I think it was like half the audience that was online in India and Pakistan, right? So basically we had all the males Like I was very popular with brown males, which is a population where you don't want to be very popular with, I guess. Like I didn't leverage that too much, but it was like a population where we were like very well known in because of the gaming, the games that we built. But we had to sell that company. It was a really tough lesson because as a Pakistani and even as Pakistani origin now, it's really hard to go to India. All our customers were in India, all our partners were in India, our advertisers were in India. So I could never go visit my largest market. And it got to the point where, especially after the Mumbai attacks and stuff, right? It became harder to do business. Even though we were based in Singapore, I decided to sell the company to an India-focused gaming company called Jungli Games, and they acquired it mostly because of the cricket game. So we sold the rest of the games off piecemeal and sold the cricket IP to them.
Okay.
And they continue running it today. But I never thought about how geopolitics and I always thought you did entrepreneurship in a vacuum, and that's the first time I realized, oh, maybe the world does affect you too, right?
Yeah.
And like you don't affect the world only; it can work the
Yeah.
other way around too. Which, in hindsight, is an obvious lesson.
Well,
So there we
that's
go.
interesting story, and I'm sorry that you had to, sell
Oh,
the company in such circumstances. But
it's fine.
so you started the gaming company, you eventually ended up selling it. What did you work on after that?
So once I was done with the gaming company in Singapore, Game Ventures, and so I was talking to a mentor of mine, a guy named Mark Organ, and Mark had started one of the first software as a service companies. They were, Eloqua went public in '99 in the first .com bubble. He'd moved to Singapore after that. And so, he was between companies, and so he invested in Game Ventures and joined our board. He was in process of starting his new company, Influitive, in Toronto. And so he's like, why don't you get on a plane and why don't you take everybody on your team that you really want to keep with you that hasn't moved over to the new acquirer, bring them to Toronto. And we've got this company called Influitive. It's a marketing SaaS company. You'll be the VP, or you'll be the head of product. And I was like, I don't know what SaaS is. I
Yeah.
don't know what marketing tech is.
Yeah.
Never been to Canada. Never didn't know what a product manager was, because when you make software, it's not like building games, right? Games are a very different world from software. Didn't know what a product manager was or did. But somehow it all worked out because I brought a whole bunch of folks from like engineers and like product manager from my team in Singapore. And the market started Influitive, but there was no product. There were like 2, 3 people on the team. And the idea behind the business was to build a software that helps other software companies, like B2B tech companies, find more customers and leverage their customers in this process, right? So, like referrals and references and reviews and other user generated content and case studies and stories and quotes, things like that, that you want your customer team to do. We would figure out where the opportunities were to ask for those things, automate asking for those things, like a community basically, right? And then take that content and collateral and give it to your team, right? So they could use it in different ways. So like if your sales team was selling to a customer and they were like, we've got a customer in our list exactly like you, they could request a reference call so that the customer can get on call with the prospect and talk to them and say, hey, this guy's have been incredible. And they could match the right people who went to the right schools or in similar industries and all that great stuff, right? Referrals and reviews were a big part of our business too. And so we started that company. Like I joined the team and then we built a product and launched a product. And, I wasn't the founder, but I was part of the founding team. And then eventually ended up being the VP of product at Influitive, got into B2B tech, which is what I still do to this day
Yeah.
because of Influitive. And then, first 3 years I spent in Toronto building that business. We got a $10 million in ARR in recurring revenue from zero in 3 years, which is really
Wow.
fast back then.
Yeah.
Still fast, but like back then it was like incredibly fast.
Yeah.
But then I got a little bored of running a team of product managers and developers. I told Mark, I'm just going to leave. He's like, you can't leave. You wanted to go to the US. And so why don't you go to San Francisco? Here's a whole bunch of money. Go start another team for us in San Francisco and go build another product for us in San Francisco, and then scale that can be our second product. So I was like, all right, let's do that. So I ended up moving to San Francisco.
So, Zaki, now you're in America. What goes on? You are building a team from ground up, you're building a new product.
Right.
Talk to me about that product a little bit. And then how did you move on to your next venture, which is Ultra Rev, right? Was that the
Yes.
next one, or was there another one in the middle?
No, that was the next one. So I moved to San Francisco. This is pre the pandemic, so it was like very geocentric and not it was spread over the world. But like having done startups in Singapore and Toronto, moving to the Bay Area was definitely like we were a very small fish in a very big pond, essentially. I moved there for Influitive. We built a product called Upshot, which was the second product at Influitive, and my mandate was on the Moonshots team. Right, my title was the VP of Moonshots, which was the idea was here's some money, go build our next product, go sell it, figure out an idea in the same vein as the advocate marketing universe that we were sort of innovating, the references, referrals, and reviews driver. Go figure out something else that works in that space. And so what I figured out, your best customers, they don't want to like do case studies for you. They don't want to be featured in your marketing. They want to do thought leadership of their own. And if that stuff happens to talk about how they used your tools and your products and your services, then so be it, right? That can be a case study for you. But really, what they want to do is make themselves the star of the story. So this is like right before this is pre-AI, and I think this can probably be done better now. And so we figured let's get a group of business journalists together and combine them with like software that lets companies invite their best customers to create thought leadership that might happen to feature their products. And the idea was journalists would pair up with your customers and go interview them, just like we're having an interview over here, and then convert this into like an article that they
Yeah.
would ghostwrite for you under
Yeah.
your name, and then our platform publish that to your LinkedIn, the company that sponsored its website, but also like other places, right? Like feature you in Forbes or like other Fortune and Red Hair, like all these platforms which would allow sponsored content essentially, right? So your customer gets thought leadership, you get a story that you can use as a case study,
Yeah.
and you have rights over it and all that good stuff, and everyone's happy, right? And
Yeah.
so Upshot started doing really well for Influitive, and we sort of, over the course of a year, we set up the teams, figured out the idea, built the product, sold it to the first 10, 20 customers, and then integrated it back into the headquarters in Toronto, which is in the
Okay.
Influitive, and they took over the product team. I think they still run it. I think the company got acquired a few years ago by a private equity fund in Canada. So what I found myself doing in the Bay Area in 2017 or thereabout after Influitive was I didn't have an idea, and I wanted to just learn more about how companies are adopting innovation in their go to market, the space I was working on in Influitive. And so I started consulting for all these like early stage SaaS companies or companies. Typically, they'd raise they figure something out, like I'd done it at with Upshot,
Mhm.
and we did at Influitive prior. They build it, they get their first few customers, they go raise some money, and now they have to build like a growth engine, right? They have to build a repeatable and consistent source of like new customers and new business. And so I was like, well, you could hire this large team of people to do things with this, or you could bring us on board and we'd apply engineering to that problem, and
Mhm.
we'd use automation. We didn't have the language around AI in 2017. It was a little early, right? But we were definitely applying like some sort of like pattern recognition, matching, and other technology to like figure out who you should be talking to, who should your next customers be,
I
making it
mean, they
very
could have
easy for
just
you.
used Influitive's software, right?
No, Influid was vastly different. Like, so we were like building for like marketing teams at very large tech companies where they'd already know who their customers are and they want to use those customers to get more customers. And that's one challenge. But here, this is sort of like I'm a very early stage company. I might have very few customers. I want to build a repeatable growth engine to find brand new customers. Now, I might engage, that might happen through my existing customers, but it could happen through direct response or cold email and outbound. It could happen through SEO. It could happen through search engine, could happen through word of mouth, and like content was big and communities that were big. And so, I was helping companies figure out all those channels, but not like doing the work directly for them, helping their teams figure out opportunities to like automate and scale the stuff that was working. Right.
Mhm.
And I found myself repeatedly doing the same things over and again for companies. Specifically, figured that every company I'm working with is, using us to like sort of write the same code again and again for them. And they're using this to figure out who's coming to their website, who's been a customer before, who's from their previous customer list made changes or has changed jobs and is now at new customers, which they should be selling to a potential customers, prospects, right? And so we started saying, okay, there's probably a software product over here. Can we make it really easy for companies to look for these, what we call signals, and the industry now calls signals, right? Can we find a good way for companies to like find these signals and then make sense of them, and then compose them and enrich them in different ways inside their CRM, inside their, their how they manage their business? so that the right teams can get access to that information, or increasingly automation could do something with it, right? Send messages out, emails out, make phone calls, things like that. So these intent signals, right? Companies were increasingly hiring us and hiring my team and myself. I have a small consulting business, right, to start with, to repeatedly build the same motion again and again, figuring out, who should the next customers be, what's the best way to reach out to them, what's the trigger that they might respond to, and then trying to figure out, listen for this stuff at scale, right?
Yeah.
And so we started UltraRev in the pandemic in 2020, and for the first few months, business was great. Like, we had all these companies signing up. We got pretty good concentration in like e-commerce companies, right? Companies that were selling software to other e-commerce brands, right? For example, where they could like send emails saying, "Hey, I noticed that you have lots of items out of stock in your store right now. That means you probably are getting lots of customer questions. And you can use our app to handle these automatically in this way." And we raised a little bit of money, and built a team, very global. And then the AI boom happened. I realized, oh man, this is going to be a real transformation to our business.
Yeah.
And so a year after starting now in 2022, decided to stop selling our old product and instead decided to move into a consulting mode with companies, right? So they wouldn't hire us to just, they wouldn't buy our software and then we'd implement our software. We'd say, okay, we'll implement software that we've written, but we'd also bring together all these tools into a consultative approach, because a lot of companies like you and me today are figuring out AI, right? And so now we're a business which it's sort of back to the consulting roots before I started UltraRev.
Yeah.
But we work with the same customers. We have our own software which can help you find signals and take advantage of them, and make sure that everything that you're doing on the go-to-market end of your company is personalized and enriched and likely to succeed. But then we also implement other people's AI, other people's tools, and bring all of this stuff together. And so, look, we write our own code and we build tools and we sell
Yeah.
them as independently as well. But our focus is very much on helping companies adopt AI successfully, and that's been really interesting. It's like a human challenge, not a technological challenge almost. And the goal is to then take these learnings and double down on a product that we think is really interesting in this space. And that's a work in progress. While we do that, get to that point, we work with tons of customers to help and support in this way.
How do you
So
convince your customers to use this new AI technology that you yourself are figuring out right now, right? Picking two, three softwares, testing them out, then combining them, changing codes, and then suggesting that to your client. Like, how do you convince your client that this is going to be good for you?
that's really interesting. But today, the appetite for AI, like not like using it and like knowing about it, is incredible. Like, everyone talks about it all the time. ChatGPT has an insane growth curve. So I think that's not the challenge. It's how do you stop people from shooting themselves in the foot, right? Like, I think Henry Ford said, if I ask my customers what they want, they'd say a faster horse. If I ask my customers what they want, they're like, spam everybody, double the spam. That's probably not a good idea, man.
Yeah.
You can do better. So I think like the appetite to learn is there. I think the push to adopt is also there because companies are frankly in dire straits, right? And now the match has been lit because companies have to adopt it or die. Because if you're making the same widget that your competitor is making for like half the number of employees or a third of the number of employees, you will lose. You will get bought by a competitor, and then that's capitalism, right? So I think it'll just be a failure of fiduciary duty to not adopt AI. So we're getting to that point.
Yeah.
That's not the challenge. The challenge really is to save companies from themselves. And we're in the faster horse era of AI at the moment.
You said that some of your clients would say just spam, double spam them. How do you break through that noise? Because I personally get like a million emails, promotional emails, and it's just too much. It's overwhelming information that's coming at you. As a client or as a seller in the market, like how do you differentiate yourself? Can AI in those cases sometimes work against you because it's so automated that people don't even know, is this a scam? Is
I think you've nailed it, but that's always been the case with marketing. I think Ogilvy
this
said,
bad? Not this
you're right,
bad.
it's not this bad. But Ogilvy said that, half my advertising is going to waste. I just don't know which half. You don't want to stop any of them because then you don't know what the impact of that's going to be on your
Yeah.
pipeline. So I feel like marketing has always been a dark art or like kind of hand wavy, especially the kind of B2B marketing that we do. Because
Mhm.
if you're in sales, you go sell, it's very obvious, right? What
Yeah.
success looks like. You either bring home the bacon or you don't.
Yeah.
And here you have marketing, and marketing's job is to kind of create leads, but leads are not the same as sales, and sales also generates its own leads, and sales always thinks it generates better leads than marketing. And the best companies that at least I work with approach marketing like a science, right? When it comes to generating demand, which is the little sphere of marketing that we work in, right? Um, Companies consider it a scientific endeavor to be the best they can be at finding new customers, and that's their advantage. Uber beat Lyft because they were better at finding customers, right? They're ruthless about it. They had spreadsheets running that would measure everything. And
Yeah.
marketers are generally, I wouldn't say the hand wavy folks, but they're not that scientific. Like, what's interesting about my company is our team is 5 people. We're all engineers, and that's very atypical for a marketing team. And so for me, and to answer your question about how we stand out, like we preach a very particular message, and at least as a consulting company, we just do, in a software business, we do one very small thing in one very particular way. We call it automated outbound. Some companies call it AI SDR. I won't bore you with the specifics of it. It's a very specific motion that they want. But so, you talked about spam, right? Like one of the smaller deals we've done, but one of the more satisfying ones in the last 12
Yeah.
months, right? There's a company, I won't take any names, but they have a software product that helps realtors to basically make better listings. It'll help you enhance the images that you're using, use AI to like add furniture to empty listings, like staging, as they call it, right? And a whole host of other services that are linked to this. We build them a funnel which basically grabs all the new houses listed on a couple of web platforms every day for sale in the US. Like 10,000 plus new houses listed for sale. At least that's what we benchmarked then. We ran them through AI to figure out which of those houses are like unfurnished in the photos, which is about 10%. And then we ran a different AI agent to figure out what the phone number and email address and contact details and preferred contact channels are for the agent, because that's not information you can find very easily. It's like a database of like real estate agents. So you just kind of scrape the listing, figure out who the agent is, send them a note saying, I noticed you just put a house up for sale today. Your listing is unfurnished. It's not staged. I know you probably were in a hurry, but you can use our software to like add furniture and stage images. And that was the first email. And look, you can get a free trial on our website, but if you use my private link, you'll get a longer free trial and you'll get some handhelds like onboarding, so that your free trial doubles. And so you don't even have to talk to me, right? The call to action is like
Sure.
very, very like important, right? Like, and so in this case, building the technology was one piece. So you're not spamming anybody. They're not saying, hey, I'm reaching out to you because you have a podcast and I thought you might want to hear from us.
Yeah.
It's, look, you put this up today and it's not furnished, and you can make this better by doing this thing, right?
Yeah.
And that might only be a few hundred emails a day, but it adds up. You don't have to send thousands because your conversion rate on that will be much higher. And so yeah, that was one small example. And then that the technology is one piece, and then the other piece is like the messaging, putting the message out there. Like their message was originally, come talk to our sales team and we'll give you a demo. And you're like, nobody wants to talk to your freaking sales team, right? Give them a longer free trial, make it permissionless, let them do it on their own time. And then, yeah, by the way, if they want to talk to a sales team, guess what? They'll tell you, right? Like, hey, can I talk to someone? So we bring that together, right? Like partially it's psychology. Like we're just helping them be better marketers because they're not thinking about it this way. It's magical thinking that you can detect this thing at scale. And then we bring the technology in to like deliver on that experience. And like when you stand at the intersection of technology and you're like really early adopters of AI and tech, but you're also really deep on the psychology of like human beings side of things, like why they'll buy the thing that you'll buy. We help them do it individually for customers. We haven't quite figured out how to bring it together in a software product that people can just do on their own. We might never get there, but that's the business today. We bring together the experience and the advice and the knowledge and the tools and the technology, and then do it together for you.
What do you think Chat GPT or AI cannot do that is only possible for humans to do?
I
Apart
don't
from
know. I mean, there's so much that ChatGPT do. Like, I mean, can't give me a massage, and that's something I'm looking forward to later today, right? Like, that'd be great. Like, got a sore back, that'd be
yeah.
amazing. I think those jobs would be always human, at least
Yeah.
for now. Right. Yeah. In all seriousness, though, I mean, all the inputs are human, right? Like, all the little pieces of training data that go into it, the parameters that then get put into a matrix and then figured, those are all that, where it's predicting your next token. That's what it does. It predicts what's the next token I should put out there. It's actually thinking a few tokens ahead. It's not like just picking out the next word. It's like trying to figure out a few words ahead to get to a thought. But I think like we're still undisputed champions of creativity. I've never had ChatGPT write me a great joke, for example. I've tried. Every time I have a suite of questions I'll ask AI to test it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and one of the questions is write me a great joke about something like this, right? With this premise. Never, right? It's always cringe, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that tells you something, right? Like, and so I don't think of AI as a human replacement, but I feel if your job is very repetitive and tedious, then you might be a little screwed.
Wow. So, Zaki, you've told us so much about AI and your companies and everything, but I have a question, and it's mostly entrepreneurial. When a person is starting off on their entrepreneurial journey, how do they ask for help? Do their network get sick of them? If you keep asking for help, when do you have to take a step back and be like, okay, maybe I'm asking for too many favors? Do people who are helping out keep score?
No, I think the most helpful people in the world are good at being helpful because they've been helpful in the past to people. And the reason they found themselves in that situation, being able to help people, is because they weren't keeping score.
Yeah.
They got asked for help. I think what's interesting is I used to struggle with this in Singapore and in Pakistan before that, and then Canada after at Influitive. Either been the boss or the CEO or the founder, or like fairly senior enough at the company where I was expected to know what everything is, how everything works, right? Like I remember I didn't know what product management, the function I was leading, was supposed to be on my flight over from Singapore to Toronto. And I was like, remember Googling it and going like, huh, that's what a product manager does.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and so but I didn't ask for help. What I really learned was I don't think that was the right move because I feel like you can figure things out and you have to get good at figuring things out on your own. And in fact, I think one of the prerequisites of asking for help, which I really like in a person, is has this person done the work to figure it out on their own? And if you can demonstrate that, that's really important in how you ask for help, right? Like you can't just go say, I was laughing with my partner, I was laughing with Safia about someone reached out to me and said, hey, can you help me find a job? How's about this kind of a job, like a title? And I was like, that's not a title that we really recruit for in tech. It's not a tech title at all. But like, and then they were like, okay, how about this title? Completely unrelated, like entirely. And we're
Yeah.
like, you're not a serious person, right? Like I just left you on red because I'm like, I mean, I'm sad that you're going through looking for a job, but you clearly haven't done the work to
Mhm.
figure out what you should be doing. If you're coming to me and asking for help, you should be like, hey, I looked into what, you worked with these folks before. I really love this company. Can I get an intro to this XYZ person that you may have known before? I respect, right? Like you're not wasting my time. But then if you're going to come to me and casually say, hey, do all the work for me,
Mhm.
then in my experience, I would probably not invest. I'll give you back the same energy that you give me.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be really very helpful, right? So I feel like
Yeah.
how you ask for help is important. But then once I moved to the US and in San Francisco in particular, I feel like the reason that place is so special and Silicon Valley is so special is because there's a code of conduct that you're expected to sort of follow. And one of those things is that you can email anybody. And I've had incredible meetings with billionaires just on a cold email. I want to talk about this thing. And they're like, we're interested in that thing too. Let's sit down and talk about it. And you're expected to just pass it forward and you can tell people they're full of it. Like the opposite of the structured tiered, like, societies that I lived in the past and that's why I fell in love with tech, right? It didn't matter what level you're at. If you're right, you're right, right? And you could see it in the startup space, but like your companies would do well basically if you were right.
Yeah.
And so I learned that mindset of not keeping score, helping everyone around you, rising tide, the technology tide to lift all boats is a very healthy mindset to have. And I feel like one thing that Silicon Valley has done successfully is export that way of thinking in at least my industry in tech, and that's
Mhm.
really great. And so I think I lost all fear of asking for help because as long as I've done the homework and I know a lot about that space and I can demonstrate and I can make it clear why helping me is a good idea and I can frame the ask in a way where it's a win-win, I have no fear of asking for help at all. And I think that's a lesson that
Wow.
I wish other people in other industries took.
What I've noticed is that the very, very successful people are more humble about offering help. They don't care about
Oh my
keeping
gosh, yes,
score.
please,
They
100%.
really don't even think that they're doing somebody a favor. It's just like, oh, let me connect you to this, let me connect you. Like it's just second nature for them. But the not so very successful ones, the very average ones, are actually the ones that are taking time to respond, or not really
Fair
being.
enough. But also, like, people are bad at asking for help, right? If someone really busy offers to help you, and but then they forget to do an intro, people sometimes will not follow up with that
Yeah,
person. Like,
yeah.
I feel bad about following up. And so you're right, ego gets in the way. And the
I think
best,
it's
smartest
not
people are
ego.
not.
It's more like you don't want to seem like a crazy person who's constantly messaging or emailing, right?
Nothing wrong with seeming like a crazy person. Some of the smartest and most interesting people I know seem like very crazy people at first. And
Yeah,
so, like, oftentimes it's like, I don't want to seem like a crazy person. I don't want to seem like a dumb person. And that
yeah,
holds people back. And you don't need to. But provided you've done the homework, you can truly be a dumb person or if you haven't done the homework. But if you've done the homework and then you're asking for help, then it's my privilege to help that person, right? Because that person is already going to make it without me because clearly they're on it. If
yeah.
I help that person, that's a future friend for the future for me also. Like, the world has a shortage of people who are on it. And so when you meet, if a person is on it, meets another person who's on it, they want to help that person because they know they'll run into that person again. And that's been so common in my career. And then I'll see that person repeatedly. I'll invest in their companies, they'll invest in my companies, and that'll be a relationship that will hold for a very long time, right?
I wish they taught this in school, the whole networking
Mm.
bit, where
I'm so bad at it. I'm so bad at
I'm
networking. I'm
so
terrible at
bad at
it.
it, but I'm just now realizing mid-30s that this is the only way to get ahead in life. You could be stupid, I mean, not
Hmm.
so sharp, but if you have a good network, it can at least get you through that first hurdle.
I'm not sure if that's going to be the case after AI gets through with the world. Like, you might have to be able to do both. But you're right. Like, I'd do it today. Like, I push that button. If someone says, "Hey, you'll be 10 IQ points dumber, but you'll be 10 EQ points smarter," I'll push that button twice, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. And that's something I wouldn't have said like 5 years ago, maybe, or 10 years ago.
So that was great, great advice, and it's been on my mind for a while. So I'm glad you answered that question. Before we finish today, I want to ask you one last question. How do you think AI is going to shape the future or the next 1 year? What is coming?
Like that time frame. So I feel we're going to see over the next 12 to 18 months, technology has a hype cycle, and you get a lot of hype, and there's this heightened expectations, and we're kind of there with AI. We have a lot of expectations, and you're going to see a little bit of trough of disappointment. So I feel like with general purpose AI, GPT, you're going to see people go like, "Yeah, I tried that, and then it was okay, and I went back to Google." Right?
Yeah,
Or Perplexity. And maybe you'll see Google roll back some of their auto summarization stuff. And people will generally have the sense that AI is cool, but like, it's not going to be a Excel or a word processor or PowerPoint, right? Like, it's an accelerant, but like maybe 20% faster. And that's a red herring, because what's actually going to be happening is going to be happening behind the scenes at every single industry. Lawyers, I'm talking about, like, mortgage refinance law, right? And underwriting. And each of these micro, small, but very important vital industries are going to be revolutionized. And I don't know which order they'll happen in, but I feel like there'll be some white collar ones that are more ripe. If there are more words involved in that
yeah,
industry, and in general, like, if you do a lot of writing or reading or producing content that's not quantitative, I think that's ripe for disruption. You'll see AI agents enter the workforce, and you're going to start hearing stories like, this 100% 10% company is at $1 billion revenue now, right? And so you're going to see like stories of like great disbalance or imbalance in like outcome versus size. Industries which are more qualitative, education is one, but obviously regulated and less regulated, right? So healthcare might have a hard time with it, but like paralegals are going to be in trouble a little bit. You'll see
even
those reports coming through,
lawyers.
and then, yeah, lawyers are more regulated, but the behind the scenes, you can offload a lot of law. You can't outsource the surgery to your nurse, right? So I think like, legal is one. There's others too. Management consultancy of any type is in trouble. Therapists might be in trouble. Who knows? Because that's like, the end patient can still interact with ChatGPT, right? Like, generally, where there's lots and lots of jobs also that are doing the same thing over and over again, and they're very words heavy,
Yeah,
right? And the quality of the provider is vastly different. Like, you
yeah,
could have a really great therapist, but most therapists kind of suck, right? You could have a really great lawyer, but like, most lawyers are really average by definition.
yeah,
That's ripe for disruption, I feel. First up, marketing, copywriting, I think, are going to be like just devastated. You might, if you're the world's best writer, you might write on Twitter really short content that will then get picked up by AI and put into marketing copy for someone else, right? And
yeah.
so I think that's another thing that's going to be gone. And so you'll start seeing these individual jobs getting replaced with agents. And I think that's going to be one set. What's most interesting is see how robotics shapes up over the next 18 months too. I feel like we might hit an inflection curve. If that happens, then there'll be a bunch of jobs that might be like physical world jobs, right? We've lost a bunch of folks that were, undocumented workers in the country. Someone's got to pick the fields, right? You might see some breakthroughs. Generally when there's some pressure to make a change happen, if you see a breakthrough there, then that's going to be a different set of AI, right? Like for low skilled or medium skilled jobs that are physical, lawn care and gardening and growing things and farming. You might have like really intensive jobs that are already under pressure because we have this environment where the workforce is reduced for those jobs, right? Serving tables. Like when you go to Japan, you see like those little robot servers anyways all
Yeah.
the time, right? So like we start seeing more of that, I think, if robotics takes off too. And I have a bet that I think it might. So like those two things I think will happen, like specialized workforce entry for like very particular roles that are very qualitative, and physical, like low end physical labor, right? That might get automated in some ways, but very in a very specialized way. I don't really believe in humanoid robots. I don't think that makes sense. But I
Yeah.
think those two things would be like really interesting to look out for in the next 18 months.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much, Zaki, once again. And I look forward to hopefully talking to you about AI
Yes.
again in a year.
Of course. Good luck with your journey till then, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. So today we learned about entrepreneurship, what it takes, how difficult it is, and some tips and tricks from Zaki Mahomed, who's a serial entrepreneur. If you did find this video interesting, please like, subscribe, and share. I will be putting down the link to his website, his LinkedIn, and Twitter at the bottom if in case you want to reach out to him. Until then, this is Rishanka Jones signing off.